Okay, class, today and this week we're going to talk about our final topic before the conclusion of the class, which is policy evaluation and policy feedback. Sort of two different ideas, but they're related. Policy feedback is what keeps the policy cycle a cycle, right? Policy feedback is going to feed back into setting the next agenda, and that's what keeps it going around. So we're going to put that aside for a second. We're going to talk about policy evaluation first. Policy evaluation is exactly what it sounds like. You're evaluating the policy. You're saying, is our policy successful or not? That's the core question. Now, how would you go about doing that? That's what this week's going to be about. I leave you some, I think, helpful charts how to think about it. Your policy could be successful in one or multiple dimensions and unsuccessful in others. For instance, it could be politically successful, it could be socially successful, but not economically successful. It could be economically successful, but a political failure and a social failure. It could be any kind of combination of these things, right? So how would you know? You're going to have to come up with measurements. And the only way to do it right is to come up with measurements before you implement. So this is the trick. We talk about this as a stage after implementation, but really policy implementation is a kind of stretch that begins with policy formation, carries across implementation, where you have to do the evaluation at certain intervals and have a planned timetable for it, and then into the period after implementation where you monitor and continue to see whether or not the policy is succeeding. So it kind of spans the last three boxes, even though it's in a box of its own. And the important thing to remember about policy evaluation is that you should, if possible, have the cleanest, clearest, most definable measurements you can. And you should be sure you know what you want to measure. And you should, if you think there's going to be ancillary benefits, try to measure them too. So I mentioned Head Start in the past video, and I'm going to use that as another example now. One way to measure Head Start success would be to say, I am going to take students who went to Head Start versus other poor students in similar communities who did not have the opportunity to go to preschool. I am going to measure a standardized test that I have them all take at various intervals, say first, third, fifth, and seventh grades. And I'm going to see if there is any improvement in test scores amongst the treatment group, those who got Head Start, and the non-treatment group, those children who missed preschool. When those types of studies are done, what they tend to find is initially around kindergarten, grade 1, early on, the Head Start kids actually show an improvement. There's a measurable and statistically significant impact in standardized tests and scores for the treatment group than the non-treatment group at that age. It tends to be gone by grade 7. That is, by grade 7, whether or not you went to Head Start doesn't seem to matter anymore for your ultimate test scores. So, some people looked at that data and said, well, Head Start, what a bunk program. We're spending all these billions on it, and all it's doing is helping kids' test scores for like this little chunk of time between maybe age 5 when they get out of Head Start and age 10 or 11 or 12, whatever it is, where the benefit totally drops off to nothing or near to nothing. Boy, does that matter at all? I can't see how it would matter. They're not ready for the labor force at that age, whatever. Maybe Head Start's just a big waste of money. And there were a lot of people making that argument. Here's the counter argument. One, oh my God, when people started talking about taking it away, did families and communities get really, really upset? Right? Now, why would they get upset if this thing wasn't working at all? Well, because one of the big benefits of Head Start, not a huge secret, is that, it's a daycare time that you don't have to pay daycare money for. So especially if you're a single mom or a single dad and you don't have a hell of a lot of money and daycare costs them what daycare costs, which those of you with children know, it can be more than rent, right? It's outrageous at this point. If you can have a spot that you know is safe and a good learning environment that watches your children for a few hours a day, that can mean the difference between having a job, even part-time or not, having a full-time job or not, being able to run a household or not. And so maybe the benefit isn't just for the kid and the test score. Like if you're measuring test scores, maybe that is one thing you think you can improve and you're interested in. But maybe also the benefit is like, should we compare mothers of children who don't go to Head Start versus mothers of children who do, or parents, or single parents, or fathers, or whoever, and see if the ones who get their child a slot in Head Start versus the ones who don't have a slot in any preschool program participate better in the economy, earn more throughout their careers, have more lucrative careers, are more likely to get higher education later in life. All these kinds of questions you can start to ask because they're afforded that opportunity during those years to maybe continue a career or finish a degree or do something. But boy, if you're just looking at the test scores, you're not going to measure that benefit of the Head Start program. And then Head Start tends to be run by the parents of people who are in it. So some people get hired directly by it, and that's another benefit. Other people learn how to become administrators by volunteering and working through it, and then maybe getting employed by it. And so like they have their sort of entrance into nonprofit careers by having their children there. Careers they might not have thought about otherwise. So that starts to explain why it's popular. And then you say, well, maybe the kids like educational standardized test scores aren't much better, but are they better socialized? Are they more or less likely to, I don't know, be happy, be free of diagnosable mental illness? Do they have more friends? Like all these kind of questions that like might really matter for quality of life and even economic productivity later, but they're just not the standardized test score question. And you can keep asking these questions, right, over and over and over again. So you should think deeply with your policy change, like what is it I want to measure and what terms do I want to have this evaluation done on? Because if you select measurement terms that just go, no, didn't work, but there are ancillary benefits you can predict and you don't measure them, you're going to have a hard time arguing that your policy is useful or was worth it. And people are just going to say that was a mistake. So you want to keep going. Now, besides picking very specific variables like that, measurable ones and reproducible ones too, so if another state or something wants to copy your policy, they can. Let's move on to policy feedback. This is a little bit tougher of an idea. And the idea works like this. Once you create a policy, there is going to be new interest groups that form to defend that policy. So with the Head Start example, all of a sudden there's going to be a Head Start Association. People are going to pay dues to the Head Start Association who work for Head Start. Other people are going to voluntarily pay money to it. It's going to raise money. And then it's going to lobby on behalf of Head Start to keep Head Start and expand Head Start and move Head Start maybe into bigger summer programs for 3-year-olds, things that didn't quite do before. As that happens, it creates a new politics. Now there is a new lobby group out there lobbying on behalf of this policy that's going to change things. Social Security in 1935 created the biggest one, right? The AARP. That's the biggest lobby by membership, not by dollars, but by membership in the United States of America. It exists mostly to protect Social Security and Medicare, benefits for retired people. And that makes sense, right? Like, why wouldn't you in this system organize to protect the stuff you have? People are loss averse. That comes from a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky. It's a whole thing called prospect theory where people will fight you tooth and nail to prevent something being taken away from them. A lot harder than they'll fight to get something new. So it's not rational. Loss averse is not a rational reaction. People just really hate getting stuff taken away from them. So if you can frame something as taking something away from them, you can really make something sound negative. And at any rate, policy feedback is when all of these feedback effects kick in to create a new politics around it. And what they tend to do is create these lock-in effects we call path dependencies, where once you go down a policy road, it's really hard to fundamentally change the road you're on. You can potentially do it, but there's going to be a lot of angry people and a lot of political pushback to keep you on the status quo. So if you want to change Social Security now that we're this far down it, there's a reason they call it the third rail, right? And you saw that somewhat in 2012 with the Romney-Ryan campaign, talking about restructuring Medicare, and AARP just went at them, said, one, they're lying, two, don't go for it. And boy, you don't want the ARP sending out mailers against you if you can avoid it, and they don't want to be partisan if they can avoid it, but they will if they think they're getting a raw deal. So, all that said, that's what policy feedback's about. Policy feedback is something you should think about when you're designing your program too. The more you can design your program to generate a politics that locks it in, the safer that program will be. FDR himself, one of the reasons why they designed Social Security to take money out of your check your whole life until you can receive it, is that you would feel like you had ownership over it. And I believe the exact quote was said, "Let's see the bastards take it away now." Right? And his idea was like, oh yeah, a future administration is going to try to undo this, but if people have paid in for years to this account and this program that they're expecting to get in the future, just taking it away becomes a lot harder than if it was just some pay-as-you-go thing where they didn't take that money out and put it in a separate account like that. Regardless of how separate the account really is when you drill down to it. All right, so all that said, we're going to conclude next week. And I hope you enjoy the videos and the charts, and feel free to ask any questions you'd like. And we will wrap this up and hopefully get your final policy papers in good shape. I'll talk to you next week.